Good morning, and as I said, welcome to our conversation with the Honorable Anita and Anand, President of the Treasury Board. I'm Trevor McPherson, President and CEO at the Mississauga Board of Trade, and of course it's a great pleasure to have everyone here join us on this, not so nice, but on a Friday morning. So thank you for coming out. I'd like to first acknowledge that we are gathered here today on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and Huron people. We also acknowledge the many First Nations, Inuit, Métis peoples who call Mississauga home, and we're grateful for the opportunity to share on the land and live and work with them, and more importantly, to make strides to meet our obligations under reconciliation. And just on that note, you may have seen through our communications, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce partnered with the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, and together the Chamber Network has released a business guidebook and some tools on what companies can do to engage our Indigenous partners in their business. So have a look at that. It's available through a link on our website, and just some useful proactive tips beyond the land acknowledgement, right? So today, as I mentioned, we're very honored to have the Minister here with us, and I would like to sincerely first thank our sponsor, Go Easy, and we'll hear from Go Easy in a minute, but thank you for supporting today's meeting. And Minister, it's good to see you again. We were out in Calgary at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in October. Lots of good discussion there, and I'm sure we'll continue some of the issues that were raised with you there, and hear an update from you as well. We just had the fall economic statement, of course, with a focus on affordability and of course addressing the housing inventory and housing affordability situation here in Canada, not only in Canada but elsewhere as well. And that link between housing and immigration and labor, it's one of those thorny problems, challenges that we're facing, and could well define sort of this period of time in our country. We'd appreciate, obviously, and the Minister will hear from this as well, Minister Valdez next week, we would have appreciated a bit of movement on CEBA, repayment deadlines and that sort of thing. But I know you'll share some context about how that decision was made, and we'll have an opportunity to engage Minister Valdez next week. I'd now like to take this time to introduce a few notable attendees with us today, including, I'm not sure if Ikra's here, Ikra College, she was expected, but she perhaps unable to make it. Of course, MP, the Honorable Omar Alghabra, Mississauga Centre, welcome. Ward 2 Councillor, not sure if Alvin's here. There you are, right in front of me. Obviously, I need a few more coffees than me. So good to see you last night as well, Alvin. And Ward 7 Councillor, Tivika Demerla. And I think that's it from Council, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. Yeah, okay, great. And our chair for 2023 is Steve Rowe. He's also President and CEO of Western Forest Products. Representing Go Easy, our sponsor today, Sabrina Anzini, Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Officer, Legal and Corporate Affairs at Go Easy, and of course the Minister Anita, Anand, President of the Treasury Board. So with that, let's get things started. I'd like to invite Sabrina Anzini from Go Easy to come on up and introduce the Minister.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I have the opportunity to introduce the Minister. So the Honourable Anita Anand was first elected as Member of Parliament for Oakville in 2019. She has previously served as Minister of National Defence and Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Born and raised in rural Nova Scotia, she moved to Ontario in 1985. Minister Anand is a devoted leader with a proven record of service. In her Oakville community, she has served on the Board of Directors of Lighthouse Program for Grieving Children, the Oakville Hospital Foundation, and Oakville Hydroelectricity Distribution, Inc. Minister Anand has worked as a scholar, lawyer, and researcher. She has been a legal academic, including as a professor of law at the University of Toronto, where she held the J.R. Kimber Chair in Investor Protection and Corporate Governance. She served as an associate dean and was a member of the governing board of Massey College and the director of policy and research at Capital Markets Research Institute, Rotman School of Management. She has also taught law at Yale Law School, Queen's University, and Western University. Minister Anand has completed extensive research on the regulation of financial markets, corporate governance, shareholder rights, and has appeared regularly in the media to discuss these topics. In 2015, she was appointed to the Government of Ontario's Expert Committee to consider financial advisory and financial planning policy alternatives. She has conducted research for Ontario's 5-year Review Committee, the Federal Wise Persons Committee, and the Task Force to Modernize Securities Legislation in Canada. In 2019, the Royal Society of Canada awarded her with the Ivana Medal for outstanding contributions in governance relating to private and public organizations. Minister Anand was a Bachelor of Arts Honours in Political Science from Queen's University, a Bachelor of Arts Honours in Jurisprudence from the University of Oxford, a Bachelor of Laws from Dalhousie University, and a Master of Laws from the University of Toronto. She was called to the Bar of Ontario in 1994. Please welcome me, join me in welcoming the Honourable Anita.
I was just saying it's very nice of her to go through all of that, but completely unnecessary, because I'm just so happy to be here with you. Finally, I have to apologize for having to postpone the event earlier in the fall. It was when Vladimir Zelensky was here, and I couldn't explain the reason why we had to postpone the event, just that it was going to be postponed. I felt terrible, but I then said, you'll understand when you find out the reason why I had to be on at that time. Well, first of all, I want to really hold my hat out to you for coming out this early and having a chat about issues that affect Mississauga, but also our entire country. Thank you so much, Omar and Ibra, for coming out. It's really great to see my MP colleagues somewhere other than in the House of Commons in Ottawa. And so thanks so much. And obviously it's great to have our sponsor, Go Easy, here. And thank you for sponsoring this event. And Trevor and Steve, your leadership here in Mississauga is so important. So thanks so much. And of course the councillors, Deepika and Alvin, great to see you here in your home turf. I usually see you in mine or at other events, so great to see you here as well. Look, I'm super happy to be here today and really happy to be able to be in a portfolio that allows me more easily to discuss some of the issues that I have training in economic policy. I kind of find it funny because one of the things that was mentioned in my bio doing some research for the province of Ontario, well, Charles Sousa was finance minister at the time, and I remember thinking, like, oh my gosh, I gotta go see Charles Sousa, and I was really nervous, so I always joke with him that, well, when we used to work together in Toronto, he used to be across the table, and I was writing this report for him, and it was a little bit nerve-wracking at the time, but I saw him yesterday at committee, which was amazing. Anyway, as was mentioned, Trevor mentioned the fall economic statement, and that's really what I'm here to chat about a little bit before we get into questions. I'm going to save a lot of at least some of the details for the questions and answer period, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the balance that we are trying to strike in the fall economic statement between our need to be fiscally responsible at this time of rising interest rates and higher inflation, and the need to take some targeted measures to address some of the crises in our country, including housing. So that is really the goal. You probably saw that the fall economic statement was pared down from usual fall economic statements and budgets because from a spending perspective, we wanted to take a more prudent approach. And so the main spend in the fall economic statement is really around housing and affordability in making sure we can get more supply unlocked for the country, including Mississauga, but you've seen Minister Fraser, including Mississauga, but really making agreements with municipalities across the country in this vein to unlock more supply. So in addition to those agreements, those are largely funded by previous spends that have been put in the budget. The National Housing Initiative, for example, $70 billion, and the Rapid Housing Initiative, another $4 billion on top of that. But what we put in the fall economic statement was $20 billion towards the construction of rental housing and additional affordable housing units. And so Minister Fraser has that work cut out for him to continue to make sure we're unlocking supply, but our goal is really to work with municipalities in the province to make sure that gets done. So that's the main spend, but there's some other really important parts of the fall economic statement. Removing the GST on counseling, for example. That's super important in an era where mental health initiatives are becoming used more and more. And just yesterday, Minister Sachs announced the new hotline, suicide hotline, 988, and it's really got the support of all parties around the House. It's really, really important. I'll say that the work that our government has to do is to strike that balance between our spending and our cutting of unnecessary costs. And so here we kind of delve a little bit more into the work that I'm doing in the Treasury Board on refocusing our spending towards the priorities of our government: reconciliation, healthcare, and the green economy, housing, affordability. Those are the priorities of our government right now. That's why we were largely elected, and that's what we need to keep working on. But at the same time, we've got to make sure across government that we're not spending unnecessarily. So the refocusing spending exercise that was in budget 2023 falls to me. It was a surprise when the Prime Minister said, I want you to move over to Treasury Board. I said, sure, of course I will do whatever you ask. And when I got there, the first thing I heard about was this refocusing spending exercise where I would be having to lead the $15 billion in savings. So finding $15 billion in savings over 5 years. That means I'm going to each ministerial colleague and saying, you have to look into your department and you've got to find savings. And that's hard in an era where we have higher inflation and higher interest rates than we are used to. So I tabled the first results of that spending exercise in the supplementary estimates be at the beginning of November. And that actually didn't really garner the attention that I thought it would, because we actually tabled $350 million in savings on outsourcing or external contracting and $150 million in savings on executive travel. But I think that was not what people were focusing on, and understandably, given the high price of groceries and the lack of housing and the need to address some of those types of issues. So we can talk more about that refocusing spending initiative in the Q&A, but I just wanted to put on the table that really the approach of our government, and I'll end here, the approach of our government really is to, on the one hand, make sure that we are focusing on the needs of Canadians. So $10 a day childcare, for example, making sure that we have the Canada Child Benefit, which has lifted almost 500,000 children out of poverty. The work that we're doing to support seniors by increasing old age security, that's another example. That type of initiative really is the kind of exemplifies the type of principles that we as a government stand for. Supporting the most vulnerable in our community and making sure that we are there. And we did that through the pandemic, and we're continuing to do that in tough economic times. And so when people often say, what is the difference? Does it make a difference if we elect you versus the Conservatives, the opposition? that's the main difference. We have a different approach to supporting Canadians. And so happy to chat about that more in the Q&A. It's always great to spar with the Conservatives in the House of Commons, but if there is a fundamental philosophical difference between the types of initiatives that we are supporting as a government and what you're seeing on the other side of the House of Commons. So happy to chat about that in questions. And most importantly, we really want to hear from you and your questions. And I believe we have a chance not only to take questions from the floor, but we also will have a little bit of time at the end to mix and mingle and get to know each other a little better. So thank you very much and happy to be with you.
So, Minister, the third quarter, we learned yesterday, saw an economic contraction in Canada of 1.1%. I know they revised the Q2 number up, so we're not in a recession by definition at this point, but certainly some clouds are there. And undoubtedly, we're going to see this negatively affect our debt to GDP ratio. And the question is there any danger of seeing our credit rating reduced? What strategies are being implemented to manage our debt? And could you outline the debt situation and the government's approach to debt?
I'm really happy that you brought up the credit rating point, and I'll just start there. The AAA credit rating that Standard & Poor's has given to our country is extremely important. This is not a rating that we come up with as a government in terms of evaluating our own economic performance. The credit rating agencies are objective analyzers of a country's fiscal situation, and we have consistently been able to maintain a AAA credit rating. So you're exactly right to point to the importance of maintaining that credit rating. And I was happy to have written some pieces, academic articles in this area to get to know it better so that when I came into Treasury Board, really able to talk about what measures we need to take to maintain our AAA credit rating. And we were able to do that from Standard & Poor's through the pandemic. DBRS did downgrade Canada to a AA+ rating, but we came back to a AAA rating with all rating agencies post-pandemic. And so I 100% acknowledge the point that you're making that there has seen some contraction in this quarter. On the other hand, our economic indicators overall remain strong. The AAA credit rating, the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7, the lowest debt in the G7. And although I say those words really quickly, it's super important. Think of the countries in the G7, and Canada has very strong, in fact, the best economic indicators among that group of peer countries. And so, you know, yesterday in the House of Commons, actually the leader of the opposition asked a question of me similar to the question that you raised. And what I said in reply was, look, our GDP is 4.1% above pre-pandemic levels. That's higher than Italy, that's higher than the EU, that's higher than Germany, that's higher than France. So yes, we are seeing some economic turbulence, but overall, the fiscal picture is sound. And Minister Freeland, in the fall economic statement, was very careful to walk the very fine line to not introduce exorbitant new spending so that we can maintain that AAA credit rating.
Thank you very much, and it's good additional context. Moving from debt to deficit. In the recent fall economic statement, it was announced that the federal government would have deficits of no greater than 1% of GDP. And by 2028-29, debt servicing costs are expected to exceed $60 billion. I think they're around 47 or something right now. Is the government open to a faster timeline for deficit elimination?
So again, a really good question from an economic standpoint, because when you see inflation and definitely interest rates rise, what that means is that the interest on your debt is also rising, and so debt servicing, therefore, paying back that interest is more expensive. And this is a point that I make and acknowledge often, that we've really got to see inflation and interest rates coming down so that the debt servicing costs correspondingly also come down. And we have been careful not to feed inflation, as I said, in the fall economic statement. It was at 3.1, it's at 3.1% now, and was at about 8% in June 2022. Now, in June 2022, I was in defense, so I was, rarely in the country because of the unjustifiable further invasion of Ukraine by Russia. But it was very hard to miss, no matter where you were, that countries around the world were suffering from high inflation. But inflation is coming down, as I said. Interest rates also are coming down and stabilizing at lower levels. And so when the Bank of Canada reviewed our fall economic statement and the line that we are seeking to draw between our prudence, fiscal prudence, and our additional spends, TIFMAC was actually fairly positive on the fall economic statement. So we have more work to do, obviously, but we're wholly aware of the need not only to ensure we can service our debt, as well as maintain a AAA credit rating.
Yes, I should also recognize and thank you for your leadership at Defense as well, and certainly that's where you feel it when there's a lot of pressure to keep investing in equipment and.
Well, also, I mean, we have to put on the table that inflation is high for countries around the world, largely because of Russia's illegal further invasion of Ukraine, causing food security crisis, causing supply chains to be constricted. And this is coming out of the pandemic where we already saw supply chains very tight. And so it's really important to put Canada's fiscal situation in the context of the broader global economy.
Right, and also recognizing there are things within the scope of our control and external factors as well.
Yeah.
We just happen to have a lot more external factors going on right now, not only the Ukraine situation, but of course in the Middle East. And you mentioned TIFMAC, and earlier this year the bank governor expressed concern that wage growth could drive inflation higher. We've certainly seen, and our members have felt it, in terms of that, attracting talent, remaining competitive in attracting highly skilled talent or talent in general. So the question is, if I can, is it a concern for you when determining salaries? Yes, in the civil service where those costs are rising as well, and as collective agreements come up for renewal and renegotiation, should employers index employees' wages to inflation?
So just to put in context for it, at Treasury Board, that minister is responsible for the public service. That's about, depending on how you count, but it's at the higher end, 350,000 employees. So it's a lot of unionized employees, different units, different unions, meaning different bargaining with different unions in terms of their collective agreements. So that's a massive point in and of itself. Making sure that the largest employer of the country is able to reach those collective agreements with the unions. And we reached a very important one with the Public Service Employees Union earlier this year. The wages are determined at the bargaining table. So that is part of what our government has been engaged in as these collective agreements come up to be renewed. And that the view of our government as a general matter is, first of all, very pro-union and very committed to the bargaining process to reach agreements about wages. And the best deals, as Minister Reagan will say, you guys have heard him say it, are reached at the bargaining table. And they are fiscally responsible because you've got the Government of Canada seeking to protect the interests of the Canadian taxpayer in those negotiations on the one hand, and you also have obviously the unions doing their important work. But it's really at the table. We've introduced anti-scab legislation recently to ensure that we can always have a place at the bargaining table to find an agreement that works for all parties.
Thank you. And I'm just looking at Omar here and just thinking about his time, a challenging time, I would say, as transport minister. And you mentioned, with regard to collective agreements and that sort of thing. And we saw issues at, Port of Vancouver, BC ports, and more recently, St. Lawrence, Seaway. What can you say in terms of those discussions, deliberations at Cabinet in terms of what we've learned from this experience and what more can be done to protect that supply chain?
Well, I'm really loath to talk about areas of expertise that Omar has as past Minister of Transport, because you're exactly right. The challenges that our government and country, and certainly the transportation area, faced coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic were significant. I'd like to give Omar a shout out on the Port of Vancouver situation, which he was able, with Minister O'Regan, to resolve successfully for the benefit of the flow of goods into our country. Where all that agreement was reached at the bargaining table and all parties were satisfied with the results. So, Omar, thank you very much for that. By the way, Omar told me he was going to heckle me this morning, so I had to do that to avoid the heckling that I'm sure is about to come. But in all seriousness, there is a need to really continue to address what we're seeing at airports, at ports, and across the transportation industry. I think we're seeing improvements. I can tell you, when I was in defense, I spent a lot of time on tarmacs, and in fact, I felt badly because most of our colleagues were emailing Omar and texting Omar saying, Omar, my flight's late. Can you help me out here? But we are seeing improvements, and that was, in my view, a lot of those delays and difficulties were caused by the constricted labor supply chain, where employees and laborers simply weren't needed during the pandemic, sought other means of income, and didn't want to return. So we have seen a growth in the area of independent contractors since the pandemic. People who are deciding that I've got expertise, I can stay at home, and I can run my own business on my own. And I can contract out for whatever expertise I have. And that growth of that sector is a pro and a con. It's a pro for the individual worker because you have flexibility in your hours, you're not on the GO train every day or what have you. You, however, do not have access to benefits that you might otherwise have in a unionized environment or in the context of government. So there are pros and cons, but you're exactly right. There are constricted labor supply chains, notwithstanding the general building back after the pandemic. This isn't just a federal government problem. I think there's a tendency in our country to say, federal government, you fix this. But we do have work to do. We'll continue to do that with the province of Ontario and with the municipalities as well.
And certainly we've seen similar it's a new era of labor negotiation. We've seen it in the automotive sector recently, and thankfully, we've seen those issues resolved. I want to also recognize, she's just probably texting me right now, Ikra here from Mississauga Air and Mills, who joined us after I recognized some of our elected officials. And I will say with regard to Omar, the one thing I will miss is, unless he has something planned, is the NORAD Santa videos that come this time. So that was a highlight for me. Now, Canada is a welcoming country, no doubt. And turning a little more serious, we have in recent months and years, certainly in recent months, received a fair portion of refugees here. Many of them locating here in Mississauga, Peel region, etc. And there's a cost to supporting and integrating all the wraparound supports that are required, from housing to employment supports and the like. So we've been carrying a heavy burden here at the municipal level to support refugees and the homeless in recent years, and it's in this context. And tragically, a homeless person living, I believe, in a tent passed away in Brampton.
Mississauga.
In Mississauga. It's important to note that as a business organization, we do support the government's decision to welcome refugees here. We certainly, not only is it the right thing to do, but everybody's aware of the talent crunch we have, and many of these refugees are skilled and come with great experience that can be put to work right away here. In order for municipalities to adequately respond to the increased number of refugees, governments have been struggling to cover these costs. And the federal government recently announced $7 million to support refugees. And while this is helpful in Peel, we've been informed that the costs are upwards of $20 million. So can the federal government further help municipalities like Mississauga that face these difficult financial circumstances from what is essentially federal immigration policy?
Well, I want to start by laying the groundwork. It's super sad when you have homelessness, regardless of whether it's refugees or not. I mean, there are tent cities in various locations across the country. I see this in Ottawa and Halifax and Vancouver. And so homelessness as a general matter is an issue that we need to continue to work with the province and the municipalities on. It's everybody's responsibility. And we are no exception, but we need to do this together, and we need to recognize that that's unacceptable. Everybody should have a place to call home. But at the same time, immigration has been one of our country's key economic drivers. It contributes to the growth in our GDP as a general matter, and immigrants have founded much of the growth in various sectors in our country. So I'm a child of immigrants. I know many people in this room are children of immigrants. I don't think we want to, at this point, start slicing and dicing on that general policy. Because again, it is something that is characteristically liberal policy position. Now, the point about asylum seekers, that's one kind of faction of immigrants, is one that Minister Miller is addressing. He and Minister Fraser, so Minister of Immigration, Minister of Housing, have been deeply engaged with the province and with municipalities on what more we can do as a federal government. So that is an ongoing conversation. And just to put a finer point on the $7 million, that's $7 million commitment for a new reception center near Pearson. And it's in partnership with community organizers. So that $7 million is no small shakes. It is recognition that there is an issue in this region that we need as a federal government to contribute to addressing. and we're going to do that. Recognizing the importance of immigration overall and recognizing the need to address this particular issue relating to asylum seekers.
Thank you very much. That's encouraging that those discussions are very much active right now and ongoing. Before we move to some questions from the audience, and please have some ready, guys. You mentioned earlier in the conversation that there's a difference between how the official opposition and Trudeau government support Canadians. In your mind, if you were to sort of pick 2 or 3 differences, if you will, can you further delve into that? And can you characterize what you meant by that statement?
Definitely. And this has become clearer to me as we moved out of the pandemic. So in the middle of the pandemic, I was doing the procurement of rapid tests and vaccines and PPE. And that was my first introduction to politics. I was just elected at the end of 2019. And then in the beginning of 2020, people started saying, well, do we have a procurement minister? And I had been watching the press conferences that my colleagues were involved in, and then all of a sudden they said, well, you need to go and do a press conference. And I was like, what?
Welcome to the big show.
Yeah. So all I can say is that my introduction to the official opposition at that time was being told or being accused of not having vaccines and we wouldn't get them until 2030. Well, we ended up being the most vaccinated country by July 2021. So that was kind of misinformation. But that was my introduction to what opposition politics was. And so coming out of the pandemic and then being in these different portfolios, certainly an economic portfolio, has enabled me to see the differences that really are philosophical between their approach and our approach to economic policy. And that's really where the fundamental difference lies. On Ukraine, notwithstanding their opposition to the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, we have been fairly aligned in terms of continuing to support military aid to Ukraine, so it was very surprising.
Much more so than our friends to the south.
Yeah, there's more unity in Canada on that issue. But in the area of economic policy, and this is really the answer to your question, if I were to choose some of the main differences, and there are definitely differences because the Conservatives have voted against these measures every time we've introduced them. So it's not as though they did support them in the House and aren't supporting them outside the House. It is that they did not vote in favor of increases to old age security, the Canada Child Benefit that has lifted, as I said, 500,000 kids out of poverty. $10 a day childcare. $10 a day childcare has enabled workforce participation by women to be at about 85%. That, to me, that is a social policy, not just an economic policy. It is a view that we think that it is important that everybody has the ability to go to work if they want to. And so those measures that the Conservatives voted against, the $10 a day child care, the Canada Child Benefit, increases to old age security, the grocery rebate, which provided checks to 11 million people in the last number of months, the dental benefit, another thing that they voted against for. So that, you can see now, what we're trying to do is lay a foundation, as our party has in the past, of social supports, especially for vulnerable Canadians, where on the other side of the House, they will criticize our government for not supporting Canadians, but they will not vote in favor of measures when we introduce them in the House of Commons to support Canadians. So there's a contradiction there, if you will, in terms of the way that they are approaching their messaging, certainly their policy.
Thanks for providing that perspective. Now I'd like to move to the audience for your questions.
And if I could just say, the question can be on anything, like any government policy, my life as a politician and before, and
what you're watching on Netflix lately.
Okay.
Councilor Gilbert. Yes.
Good morning, Minister, and thank you for being here. And I really enjoyed your introductory remarks because they were sort of informal, very engaging. Often people read off the podiums, very impressive. You had all the numbers on your fingertips. I just thought I'd go with the first question because I wanted to sort of pick up where Trevor left off. And maybe push back a little on your answer, nicely. You said, and this is on the refugee crisis, so let me just set the table. What's happening is asylum seekers, because they come to Pearson Airport, they come into the GTA. They have no funding attached. So if you're a refugee from Syria, or Afghanistan, or Ukraine, the federal government attaches dollars to those people coming in. The asylum seekers, at this point, the federal government has $0 attached. So what's happening is they're coming in here, and then they're being forced to come into our shelters. And because they're coming into our shelters, at the regional appeal at the municipal level, we are taking them in. It's the right thing to do. That's cost us $20 million already. The federal government is aware of this. So to say that $7 million is no small change, I'm going to push back. Because that $7 million is for a welcoming center, a new initiative. But right now, the city of Mississauga taxpayer, property taxpayer, is footing the bill for that $20 million, which should have come from your government, collected from all Canadians. So that's unfair. And the challenge I'm having understanding is, why is it so hard for you guys to repay us the $20 million and make a commitment? Because this $20 million is spent, but we're going to keep spending through the winter. There's no money for the operating costs of taking these asylum seekers in. It should be a simple matter for the federal government to say, thank you, Region of Peel, for doing our job, because we did your job. Here's the $20 million you already spent, and here's funding, because we know this is going to continue. So I'd like an answer.
Okay, thank you. That's great. I actually really appreciate the numbers on that. I had no idea that the numbers were at 20 million, and that's very helpful. So I will actually, after this, have a conversation with Minister Miller. I can put you in direct touch with Minister Miller so that he can hopefully give you context of the negotiations that I mentioned he and Minister Fraser are having with partners across the province, across the country on this. I know that they are engaged with the City of Toronto and the province, and I assume that they will also be in touch with different municipalities across the country. It's not directly my portfolio, so I can't actually respond. It wouldn't be a good idea if I start explaining how we're going to put more money on the table without more background from those ministers in terms of the stage that they are at in those conversations, but happy to put you in touch with them. I don't disagree that we all have a role to play, and it's a question of figuring out how to separate responsibilities amongst that. I know that there are numerous municipalities facing similar questions, and we have to do our best for people coming into Canada.
So I want to thank you for that positive response. And the only thing I'll say is I think what's frustrating is these numbers are known to the people who ought to know. And at the very least, there can be a commitment. It's not that hard to say, you guys spent the 20 million, you're going to get it, right? It's not that hard to just acknowledge that. And acknowledge, I mean, you may not have dollars, but to acknowledge that going forward there will be stable funding. Because otherwise, it goes on the property tax bill. As you know, as municipalities, we cannot borrow. So this 20 million is right now coming out of our tax stabilization fund. So we're drawing down on our reserves. if you don't get funding next year, we're going to continue to spend, and it's going to go on the property tax payrolls, which is patently unfair. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And
So as a general matter, I think our government has been very proactive in working directly with municipalities and not always needing to involve the province, especially when the province doesn't agree from a policy perspective with the approach that the municipality and the province and the federal government want to see occur. We've been doing that on housing. We did that including in the area of Mississauga, in terms of ensuring that Mississauga receives money from the Housing Accelerator Fund. And Mayor Crombie, I thought, did a very good job in terms of making sure that the federal money did flow to Mississauga, and I thank the councillors that supported her in that effort. So it's not the case that you're going to see the federal government simply walk away from social problems. On the contrary, we are a government that works directly with municipalities and addresses social problems. It just so happens that this is not an issue in my portfolio, so I can't simply explain what is being done. A lot of it is negotiation, so it would be super imprudent for me to go down that road, but as I said, I'll put you in touch with the necessary individuals.
You mentioned misinformation a couple of times. And it made me think of the accelerated pace at which technology is impacting business, in particular artificial intelligence, and what do we do about regulating this fast-moving piece, and the other, cybersecurity. Can you speak to those issues and how the government is sort of getting its head around how we can both benefit from the opportunities, but protect maybe.
So Treasury Board is kind of like the default department for all other things that we need to do in government, for all things we need to do in government. So artificial intelligence is also in Treasury Board. And so far this morning I've told you that greening governments in my department, all the federal employees are in my department. Regulating spending is also in my department, so it's
and for a department that most people don't really understand.
I guess the word treasury refers to finances, and it is largely kind of illustrated through these different initiatives. So in the area of AI, in particular, and cybersecurity, that's an area that I am really happy I had that experience in defense on, because it really helps in developing our digitization strategy, promoting the responsible use of AI, and addressing our government's cybersecurity, and in particular DDoS attacks. And those are all three areas that I'm working on right now. Let me just give you an example. I can't go through all of the different things, and I won't bore you with all that. But I will say that as soon as I came in to office, I launched 2 sets of guidelines. One to deal with outsourcing and third-party contracting, to make sure that there were responsibility rules in place, and made sure that the public service school had to learn about those those areas of responsibility in terms of third-party contracting. And then the other set of guidelines was in the responsible use of AI. So we're in this area of rapid technological development where society at large is using AI, and the government of Canada is no different. So in the rules I said yes, government employees can use AI in their daily lives, but there are some responsibilities that come with the use of AI. One of them should be clear, that we have to continue to comply with existing law. Privacy law, for example. Anti-fraud law, for example. Copyright law, exactly. And where government business is confidential, that cannot be a part of the usage of the AI platforms, like ChatGPT, etc. So we have to make sure that we've got a framework for the use of AI, And that is largely going to fall to the managers in each department to make sure that that is occurring. And then the last thing I'll say is when I was reviewing these guidelines with my team at the department, I said, guys, technology evolves so rapidly. We can't just issue these guidelines and let them languish in some library or filing cabinet or what have you. I said, we need to revise them periodically, update them, include lessons learned, so that they're pertinent to the particular time that we're living in, especially given the evolution of AI. And so this is something that's an ongoing process. They're evergreen, and we'll continue to set the example for other businesses across the country about the responsible use of AI in the workplace. And we encourage businesses in this room to take a look at our AI guidelines, implement something similar if that's what you want to do in your workplace. Tell us if you have feedback about how we can improve our own guidelines, and we'd love to take that on board.
Right, and I know parallel to that, there's the international community is looking at at common protocols and that sort of policies around AI. So interested in that. Very much, Minister, for taking the time. I want to thank you so much for the support, and we look forward to our continued dialogue together. So, and time now for.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.